Now that we have an understanding of how plants function as a group, we can begin to put our planting designs on paper. This might seem like an overwhelming task, but if we use our knowledge of plant function, we can create a planting design by simply adding functional groups to our design. Remember, at this point we want to focus on function, and the plant names will come later. I'm going to be using this bed surrounding our nursery barn as an example to help visualize my drawings. And because we're using an existing bed, we have some plant material already established, but this bed is far from complete, and we'll go ahead and complete that on paper. We also have an existing bed outline already established, but if you're creating a new bed, you want to determine the outline based on its surroundings, as well as the overall style of the landscape. In a formal landscape, it might be more linear, and it might be more curvilinear in a natural setting. Well, let's get started drawing. I've drawn the outline of our garden bed here and labeled the porch and the lawn so we know our orientation. Now, if you have any permanent structures in your bed, you want to make sure to add those. We have a water faucet right in this corner, so you want to make sure anything that's permanent is on your drawing so you can work around it. Well, the first thing we're going to add is our accents. And because this garden is viewed from many different angles, we want to make sure that we place our accents accordingly. The corner is an ideal place for an accent because it's going to be viewed from all directions. So I'm going to go ahead and add a circle to represent an accent in that corner. Now, our garden's large enough for a secondary accent, and I'm going to look at the remaining space in this garden, and the bulk of the area is on the eastern side, and so that's going to be the logical place to add a second accent in our garden. I'm going to go ahead and add another accent here. Now our accents need a backdrop for their performance. Now the backdrop's going to vary depending on the type of bed you have and its surroundings. So for example, if you have a bed that's up against a wall and you have your accents in there, the backdrop to that accent might be a little bit larger. You might have maybe a medium-sized evergreen. It's going to have a little bit more mass to it. If you have an island bed with two different accents, you might put a backdrop more in the middle of that planting, and what that's going to do is provide a backdrop when you're viewing the accents from different sides. It's going to give you a backdrop from multiple angles, and that's what we do in an island. We look at it from several different angles. Now our bed's a little bit different because it's also viewed from the porch side, and so we don't want our backdrop to be too tall or else you won't be able to see into the garden. So I'm going to add a rather low backdrop, and we already have some nandinas in place for this purpose. Now the nandinas right now are fairly small, but as they mature they should reach a height that's just maybe an inch or two above the level of the porch. And this is an important point, that when you're making your drawings, you want to make sure that you're accounting for the mature size of your shrubs and your perennials. If you're working with trees, you want to work within a reasonable time frame, maybe their size within 10 years, 5 to 10 years. We also need to create a backdrop behind our amber maple on the corner. And we currently have a few nandinas in place for this, but their overall effect is they're too light. There needs to be more mass back there. So we can beef that up by adding a few more nandinas to that planting. We also have a couple of areas, these corners, and the edge of the garden. If we had continued our row of nandinas all the way to the edge, the garden would just kind of disappear into the stairwell. We need something bulkier with a lot more mass in that corner, and I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit larger circle for a larger plant here in the corner to anchor the garden in. And I'm going to repeat that in this other corner because we have another large space, and it's a really nice idea to have a little bit of repetition to bring some of the plant material from one end of the garden to the other. We have one more corner down here where we're going to have another bit of mass to beef it up. The next thing we need to do is to add our supporting material for our accent. So what I'm going to do is flank our accents, and for now I'm just going to draw the spaces that need to be filled. I'm just using some ovals to represent the space that needs to be filled. Those can be filled with a single plant to create a mass if you use a large spreading plant, or you can use a mass planting of some smaller plants to fill that space. But what you do want is a nice mass, and you want to also repeat that throughout the garden. It's a good idea to use maybe 2 or 3 different species and repeat them rather than a whole bunch of different species for your flank. Now we need to add some transitional material to our garden to tie the different pieces together, the front to the back, the left to the right. On our drawing, we're going to need some transitions in the center part where it's pretty wide open. Also on the southern side, and the transition can be groups of plantings or it could be a large plant. I think on this side I might add a couple of distinct groups and different sized groups. Remember, plants look really good in 3s, 5s, or 7s, a little bit more repetition. The transition needs to be proportionate to the amount of space that's being filled. We have a nice large space between our 2 accent trees, so we're going to need a little bit larger or more plant material at least in that area. And we already have a purple fountain grass in place, which does a really nice job of bridging the gap between the 2 accents. And when you're thinking of the transition, you want to think of transitioning in height, also colors or textures. There's a lot of different ways you can transition between one element and another. Finally, we're going to add some ground covers on our drawing, and ground covers really unite the garden. You want to use the same ground cover going all the way along from one end of the garden to the other, just to really pull it all together. Ground covers can be a perennial plant, or you can use annual bedding plants to add a little extra color. For example, on the corner of our planting, it's an ideal place to add a mass of pansies under here to add a lot of winter color. Put a bunch of bulbs there so in the springtime we get a lot of color, and then we'll replace those with summer annuals. It's a really good opportunity to add color. If you're not so interested in changing out the garden with the seasons, then a perennial ground cover might be a better option for you. The plans that I've been drawing so far are called plan view, and they're the bird's eye view of your garden bed. And they're really useful for giving you a general idea of the amount of space that's going to be covered by these different elements and the amount of ground space. It's useful for trying to identify how many plants you might want to put in an area so that you could cover enough area. But it doesn't give you any indication of plant height. And so for that, you want to use what's called an elevation view. And an elevation view is a drawing that looks, it appears as if you're looking right into the garden, as if you were standing next to it. And the advantage of this, of course, is that you can see how tall the different elements in your garden are. And I've created some illustrations to help show this. I drew out a plan view of a simple bed, and then I put in different plants with different elevations to give an idea how the same plan view can relate differently depending on the height of the plants we use. So in the first example, all the plants are very similar in size, and it's very monotonous across the garden. So what we really want to do is vary the height, and the second drawing shows that a little bit better. Our background plants are much taller, and it allows them to actually function as a background. And then we have our accent plant and a whole bunch of different height in our plants so that we get a lot more variation and a lot more interest in that planting. I don't really think of myself as a good artist, but you don't really have to draw well at all to create these landscape drawings. And there's some simple tools that you can use. We're really creating a series of different sized circles, and so you can get some templates that have different sized openings on them. There's also some that have different shapes for different types of plant material that you might want to put in your bed. You want to just keep these simple. They're really just a tool to help you lay out a garden. And it's much easier to correct mistakes on paper than it is to correct mistakes out in the landscape. Remember, as you go through this process, we want to think in simple terms of plant function, colors, textures. Those will come later, and plant names certainly will come later as well. So for now, think function and just get those different roles on paper.